It was an unusually quiet morning for Officer Tom Patterson and his wife, Kate. The two had recently settled into a small town, eager to leave behind the hectic city life. Tom, a seasoned cop, was familiar with every nook of his new beat, and Kate enjoyed the peace that came with the change. But things began to shift when Kate noticed something odd during her morning runs. A little girl with big, curious eyes and braids that bounced with every step kept following her. At first, Kate brushed it off as a coincidence, thinking the child was just playing. But as days passed, she realized it wasn't random at all. Every morning like clockwork, the girl was there, always watching, yet never saying a word. Kate tried smiling and waving, hoping to spark some kind of friendly exchange, but the girl remained silent, staring at her with a solemn expression that was strangely mature for a child. She was alone, with no sign of an adult nearby. It was clear the girl was keeping a careful distance, never getting too close, but never letting Kate out of her sight. At first, Kate felt flattered, maybe even a little charmed. But there was something about the girl's persistence and the quiet intensity in her eyes that began to worry her. She shared the odd encounters with Tom, who, being the protective husband he was, brushed it off as a harmless kid thing. "She's probably just curious," he'd say with a shrug. But as days turned into weeks, and the girl's presence became an unshakable routine, even Tom grew uneasy. One chilly morning, after another silent encounter, Kate couldn't hold her curiosity any longer. She approached the little girl, hoping to finally get some answers. But as she drew nearer, the girl simply turned and bolted away, disappearing into the mist. Frustrated and unnerved, Kate returned home and told Tom about what had happened. Tom's instincts kicked in, and he decided to look into it further. But what started as a simple curiosity turned into a deeper investigation that neither of them saw coming. Tom started asking around, checking local records and talking to people in the community. But no one seemed to know who the girl was or why she would be following Kate. Then, one evening, after a long shift, Tom returned home to find Kate sitting by the window, looking unusually tense. "She was there again today," she whispered, her eyes fixed on something distant. But this time, she said something. Tom leaned in, a chill prickling down his spine. "What did she say?" Kate hesitated, as if struggling to find the right words. She called me, Mama." Tom felt his heart skip a beat. It made no sense. They didn't have children, nor did they know any families in the area with a little girl who might look up to Kate like that. The idea that this child, who had been silently following her, now saw her as a mother figure was disturbing. But what shook Tom even more was the look on Kate's face. She seemed haunted, as if a part of her was truly starting to believe that the girl was reaching out to her. Determined to put an end to the mystery, Tom decided to confront the girl if she showed up again. But the next day, she was nowhere to be found. And the next day, and the one after that. Days passed in silence, and just as they began to think it was over, Kate found something outside their door, a small, crumpled drawing of a family. The girl was there, standing beside a woman who looked unmistakably like Kate. A strange mix of emotions swirled within Tom, a mix of frustration, fear, and protectiveness. He knew there had to be more to this than a lonely child with a wild imagination. Was this some kind of game, a prank, or a child in need of help? He couldn't shake the feeling that the girl was trying to tell them something important, something urgent. With no other choice, Tom called in a few favors at the station. He needed backup, not just to find the girl but to uncover what had led her to their doorstep. And as he waited, the nagging suspicion grew. This was no ordinary child, and whatever she was hiding could be much darker than he and Kate could ever imagine. Tom's mind raced as he waited for his backup to arrive. He thought he'd seen everything in his years on the force, but this was different. The situation was tugging at him in a way he hadn't felt before. Maybe it was the way Kate's expression had changed, going from mild curiosity to something deeper, something almost motherly. Or maybe it was the girl's haunting silence, her ability to just appear and disappear like a shadow. Whatever it was, he couldn't let it go. A few of Tom's fellow officers pulled up, giving him concerned looks when he told them the story. "A girl who follows your wife and thinks she's her mom," one officer muttered, scratching his head. "Sounds like something straight out of a ghost story." But Tom could see that, beneath their jokes, his friends were unsettled. There was a strange intensity to this that no one could ignore. They decided to split up, canvassing the neighborhood, hoping to find someone who knew the little girl or had at least seen her around. Tom spoke to neighbors, store owners, anyone who might offer a lead, but each conversation left him more confused. The girl was practically invisible in the community. No one seemed to know her, no one had seen her, and every path they followed led to a dead end. Frustration gnawed at him as dusk fell. Then, as he and his team regrouped near the local park, he saw her. She was standing at the edge of a grove of trees, just on the outskirts of a playground, her small frame almost hidden in the growing shadows. Her gaze was fixed on Tom, her dark eyes intense and unblinking. He moved toward her cautiously, holding his hands up in what he hoped was a reassuring gesture. "Hey there," he called softly, trying not to spook her. "Do you remember me? I'm Kate's husband. Do you want to tell me your name?" The girl took a step back, looking ready to bolt. But just as he thought she would disappear again, she did something he hadn't expected. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn, folded piece of paper. Hesitating, she held it out to him. Tom approached slowly, taking the paper from her outstretched hand. It was another drawing, much like the one they'd found outside their door. But this time, there were more details. The girl had drawn herself standing with Kate and Tom, her small hand holding Kate's. But what sent a chill through Tom was the figure standing in the background, tall, shadowy, and menacing, with hollow, dark eyes that seemed to watch the family with an eerie intensity. Tom looked back at the girl, but before he could ask anything, she turned and ran, vanishing into the trees. He and his team searched the area, but she was gone, as if she'd melted into the night. As he walked back to his car, he held the drawing tightly, trying to make sense of it. It felt like the girl was trying to warn them about something, but what? Back at home, he showed Kate the drawing. Her face paled as she looked at the figure in the background, a figure she swore looked eerily similar to someone she remembered from her own childhood, a relative who had passed away years ago under tragic circumstances. The memory was faint, but the feeling it stirred was unmistakable. "Tom, I think she's trying to tell us something about our past, about something we've forgotten," Kate whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom wrapped his arms around her, sensing her unease but unsure how to comfort her. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this girl was trying to communicate, it was something deeply connected to both him and Kate, a part of their past they hadn't fully uncovered. They tried to go about their lives as usual, but the girl's absence became almost as haunting as her presence. Days passed, and Tom threw himself into work, trying to distract himself. But no matter how many cases he tackled or hours he spent at the station, he couldn't shake the image of that little girl standing in the park, her sad eyes watching him, as if pleading with him to understand something just beyond his reach. One evening, as he and Kate sat on their porch, the air thick with an unsettling quiet, they heard a soft knock at the door. Tom's heart raced as he opened it, half expecting to see the girl standing there. But instead, there was an envelope, sealed tightly with a name scrawled across it in a child's handwriting, Kate's name. Kate took the envelope with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a photo, old and faded, of Kate as a young girl. She was standing in a yard, holding the hand of a younger child, a girl who looked remarkably like the one who had been following her. Tom felt a cold sweat break out as he looked at the photo, the familiarity of the child's face hitting him like a punch. This wasn't just any girl. Somehow, she was tied to Kate's past, to a memory she had long buried. "I don't understand," Kate whispered, her fingers tracing the edges of the photo. "I never had a sister. I don't even remember this girl." But Tom could see the conflict in her eyes. Deep down, some part of her recognized the girl, even if the rest of her mind refused to. It was as if the past was reaching out, pulling her back into a story she'd forgotten, or maybe had never truly understood. And just as they began to feel the weight of a forgotten past pressing in, Tom's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, with a message that made his blood run cold. Asterisk, "She's coming for you. Protect her." Tom looked at Kate, his mind racing with questions and fears. He didn't know who had sent the message or what it meant, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over yet. The little girl had found them for a reason, and until they uncovered the truth, they'd be living in the shadow of that mystery. Tom and Kate sat in silence, the weight of the mysterious text message heavy between them. Protect her. Who was her? Was it the little girl? Kate could feel her mind spiraling, trying to piece together fragments of memories and emotions that felt familiar but just out of reach. The girl in the photo, the one standing beside her younger self, had the same solemn eyes, the same guarded look. It was as if the past had come knocking on their door in a way she wasn't prepared for. Tom placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Kate, are you sure you don't remember anything? Maybe someone from your childhood, a friend who looked like her?" Kate shook her head, feeling both frustration and fear bubbling up. "I don't know, Tom. My childhood was complicated. After my mom left, there were years I've tried to forget. Maybe that girl was a friend, or maybe she was just someone I knew in passing. But none of it explains why she's here now or why she thinks I'm her mother." Tom frowned, his gaze fixed on the old photo. "But if this girl is somehow connected to your past, and she's showing up now, there's something we're missing." Kate took a shaky breath, staring out the window into the night. Her heart ached with an inexplicable sadness, as if she'd lost something she hadn't realized was gone. "What if she's in trouble, Tom? What if she needs us? We can't just ignore this." Tom knew that look on her face, determination mixed with worry. As a cop, he was used to dealing with all kinds of emergencies, but this felt different. He didn't have any answers, and for the first time, he felt out of his depth. But he couldn't deny the strange connection the girl had with Kate. Whoever she was, she had found them for a reason. The next day, Tom decided to dig deeper into Kate's past. He called up her mom, hoping she might remember something that could explain the girl's sudden appearance. Kate hadn't been close with her mother since childhood, but Tom figured it was worth a shot. After a few rings, her mother picked up, her voice weary. "Tom, everything okay?" she asked, clearly caught off guard. "Yeah, everything's fine," Tom replied, trying to keep his tone light. "I just had a question about Kate's childhood. Do you remember if she had any close friends, maybe a younger girl who might have looked up to her like a sister?" There was a long pause on the other end, and Tom could hear his mother-in-law's breathing grow heavier. "Tom, why are you asking about that?" Tom glanced over at Kate, who was sitting nearby, watching him intently. "We've just come across some things that have brought up old memories for Kate. There's a little girl who's been showing up, and she seems to know Kate. She even looks like her. We found an old photo, and I thought maybe you could help us make sense of it." Her mother's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. "Tom, there's something I never told Kate. Something from when she was very young, but I didn't think she'd ever need to know." Tom's grip tightened on the phone. "What are you talking about?" "There was a time, a long time ago, when we had to take in a child. A girl, a little younger than Kate. Her name was Lila." Her voice cracked. "Lila's family was troubled, and there was no one else to take her in. She stayed with us for a few years, and Kate grew attached to her. They were like sisters. But one day, Lila's family came back and took her away. Kate was too young to understand, and I tried to protect her from the truth." Tom's pulse quickened as he listened. "Why didn't you tell Kate?" "Because it broke her heart when Lila left. For months, she'd wait by the window, thinking her sister was coming back. She'd cry herself to sleep, asking for her. Eventually, she stopped asking, and I thought she'd moved on. I never brought it up again." Tom felt the pieces falling into place, the fog of confusion lifting just a bit. But why would Lila come back now? After all these years, why would she be here? Kate's mother was silent for a long moment, and Tom could hear her sniffling. "Maybe she's in trouble, Tom. Or maybe she's just lost, like she was back then. I don't know, but if it really is her, Kate might be the only one who can help her." Tom ended the call, his heart heavy with the new information. He told Kate everything he'd learned, watching as her face shifted from confusion to shock to a strange, heartbreaking sense of recognition. I remember now," she whispered. "I used to have a sister. I didn't know. I thought she was just a friend or a playmate, but she felt like family. And then one day, she was gone. I waited for her every night." Tears filled her eyes as she looked up at Tom, the weight of a forgotten past pressing down on her. "Do you think it's really her, Tom? After all this time?" Tom took her hands, his own heart aching for her. "I don't know, Kate. But if she's here, if she's been looking for you, then we need to find her. We need to make sure she's okay." In the following days, Tom pulled every string he could at the station, checking records for anyone who might match Lila's description. He talked to social workers, reviewed missing persons cases, anything that might offer a clue. But each search came up empty. It was as if Lila had vanished from every system, leaving no trace behind. Meanwhile, Kate felt haunted by memories that were slowly surfacing, flashes of laughter and whispered secrets shared in the dark. She remembered the way Lila used to cling to her hand, the way they'd play in the yard, creating imaginary worlds where they were both safe. It was a bond she hadn't fully understood back then, but now, the emptiness it left felt sharper, more real. One evening, after another fruitless day of searching, Kate sat on the porch, lost in thought. The sky was beginning to darken, and she watched as the stars slowly appeared, one by one. She remembered how Lila used to love the stars, how they'd lie on the grass and make up stories about each one. It was a memory she hadn't thought about in years, but now, it felt as if Lila was right there beside her. And then she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper on the breeze. "Mama?" Kate's heart raced, her eyes scanning the shadows. She rose from her chair, feeling that strange pull she'd felt every time the girl had appeared. She walked down the porch steps, her pulse quickening as she moved toward the edge of the yard. She felt something guiding her, something she couldn't explain. Then she saw her, standing at the edge of the trees. The little girl, with her braids and solemn eyes, watching her silently. Kate felt a rush of emotions, fear, longing, an inexplicable urge to reach out and hold her. "Lila," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The girl didn't move, but her eyes softened, a glimmer of recognition in them. It was as if she'd been waiting for this moment, waiting for Kate to remember her. Kate took a step closer, her heart pounding. She wanted to reach out, to touch her, to reassure herself that this was real. But as she drew nearer, a chill ran down her spine. Something was wrong. The air around her felt heavy, oppressive, as if a dark presence was lurking just beyond the trees. She looked over her shoulder, suddenly aware of how alone she was. The girl's gaze shifted, and Kate saw the fear in her eyes, the silent plea for help. Just as she was about to reach out, a rustling sound echoed from the trees, low and menacing. The girl's eyes widened, and before Kate could react, she turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows. Kate stood there, frozen, torn between the urge to follow her and the instinct to run back to the safety of the house. She took a shaky breath, her mind reeling. Whatever was happening, whatever darkness was haunting this child, it was something far beyond her understanding. And as she turned back toward the house, a sense of dread settled over her. She knew that this was only the beginning, that the secrets of her past were coming back to life, pulling her into a mystery she wasn't sure she could solve. But one thing was certain. She couldn't abandon Lila, not again. Kate couldn't shake the encounter. She felt the little girl's presence everywhere, as if her spirit had woven itself into the fabric of their lives, refusing to let go. In the days that followed, Tom watched her grow quieter, more withdrawn, lost in thoughts she couldn't voice. He knew she was reliving memories, piecing together fragments of her past with every sleepless night, and he felt powerless to help. One evening, as Tom got home from a late shift, he found Kate in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by photo albums and keepsakes. Old family photos lay scattered around her like puzzle pieces, and her hands shook as she sifted through each one. "I was trying to remember, Tom," she whispered, barely looking up as he walked in. "I thought maybe if I went through all of these, I'd find something, some memory, some trace of her. But it's like she's been erased, as if she was never there." Tom sat down beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes the mind blocks things out to protect us, Kate. Maybe there's a reason it's so hard to remember." Kate shook her head, frustration etching deep lines in her face. "But I want to remember. I need to. I can feel her, Tom. I can feel her out there, and I know she needs us. There's this sadness, this fear. It's like she's trapped, calling out, and no one can hear her but me." Tom squeezed her shoulder, his face thoughtful. "Then we won't stop until we find her," he said quietly. "There has to be someone out there who remembers her, someone who can help us figure out what happened." He leaned over, lifting one of the albums from the floor and flipping through it slowly. Most of the photos were of Kate as a child, her smile bright and carefree. But as he looked closer, he noticed something odd. In several of the pictures, Kate was alone, standing by a playground, a swing set, or even by the living room window. Yet the expression on her face, the way her gaze seemed focused on something just out of frame, it was as if she was waiting for someone to join her. "Kate, it's like there's a gap here," he murmured, showing her the photos. "You're not just alone, you look like you're missing someone." Kate stared at the images, her breath catching as memories rushed back in fragmented, flickering flashes. She remembered standing by the window, her tiny fingers pressed against the glass, waiting. She remembered a soft voice whispering her name, a small hand reaching out to hold hers. She remembered Lila. "I can feel her with me, even in these photos," Kate whispered, tracing the empty space beside her younger self. "She was a part of me. I know that now, but why did she leave? And why has she come back now?" Before Tom could respond, they heard a soft creak behind them. They turned to see the front door slowly inching open, even though they hadn't heard a knock. Cold air seeped into the room, chilling Kate to the bone. She looked at Tom, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Tom jumped up, reaching for his flashlight, and scanned the entryway. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Is someone there?" The door stood open, but there was no one outside, only the darkness and the distant sound of wind rustling through the trees. Kate moved cautiously toward the door, her heart pounding as she peered into the night. And then she saw it. A small figure standing at the edge of their yard, her face illuminated by the dim glow of the porch light. It was Lila, her braids swaying in the breeze, her eyes wide and frightened. Kate felt her feet move on their own, drawing her closer to the girl. She knew Tom was right behind her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder, but all her attention was focused on Lila. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Lila, it's me, Kate. Do you remember me?" Lila's gaze softened, and for a moment, Kate saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. But before she could reach out, Lila took a step back, her small hand clutching something tightly. Kate could just make out a piece of fabric, a tattered, worn piece of cloth that looked like it had been through years of hardship. It was a familiar shade of blue, one that tugged at Kate's memory. She gasped, realizing what it was. That's from the dress I gave you," she whispered, the memory rushing back in vivid detail. "The day you left, I wrapped you in it because you were shivering. I told you it would keep you safe." Lila clutched the cloth even tighter, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. It was as if she wanted to speak, to explain, but something was holding her back, something dark and unyielding. Kate took another cautious step forward, but just as she did, she heard a low, menacing growl from the shadows. She froze, her blood running cold as a figure began to emerge from the darkness, a man, tall and gaunt, his face obscured by shadows. His eyes glinted with an unnatural light, and there was a cruel, twisted smile on his lips. Lila's face turned pale, and she took another step back, her gaze darting frantically between Kate and the approaching figure. "Tom," Kate whispered, her voice laced with terror. "Who is that?" Tom's hand tightened on her shoulder as he watched the figure approach, his instincts screaming that something was horribly wrong. He'd seen a lot in his years as a cop, but this was different. This was something darker, something that didn't belong in their world. Without thinking, he stepped forward, positioning himself between Kate and the figure. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady but filled with anger. "Why are you here?" The man's twisted smile grew wider, and he tilted his head, as if amused by Tom's defiance. "I think you already know, officer," he sneered, his voice low and mocking. "After all, you've been digging up memories that were better left buried." Tom's heart pounded as he stared at the man, his mind racing. The words were unsettling, as if they hinted at a truth he wasn't ready to face. He glanced back at Kate, whose face was pale with fear, and he knew he couldn't let anything happen to her or Lila. "Leave," Tom said, his voice a warning. "You don't belong here." The man chuckled, a hollow, chilling sound that sent shivers down Kate's spine. "Oh, but I do. You see, I've always been here, hiding in the shadows, waiting. And now that you've found her." His gaze shifted to Lila, his eyes narrowing with a possessive intensity. "I can't let her go." Lila's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Kate, silently pleading for help. Kate felt her heart break at the sight, a fierce protectiveness rising within her. She couldn't let this man take Lila, not after everything the little girl had been through. With a surge of courage, she took a step forward, reaching out her hand. "Lila, come with me," she said softly, her voice filled with love and determination. "You don't have to stay with him. You belong with us now." Lila hesitated, glancing back at the man, her fear evident. But then, slowly, she took a step toward Kate, her small hand reaching out to grasp Kate's. The man's face twisted in anger, his eyes flashing with a dark fury. "You have no right," he snarled, his voice filled with venom. "She's mine." But before he could move, Tom stepped between him and the girls, his stance firm and unyielding. "Not anymore," he said, his voice steady. "You don't own her, she's free." The man's face contorted with rage, his figure seeming to waver in the darkness. He let out a furious growl, but with each passing moment, his form grew fainter, less solid, until he was nothing more than a shadow, dissolving into the night. Kate felt a sense of relief wash over her as the darkness lifted, replaced by a calm silence. She looked down at Lila, who clung to her hand, her face filled with a mix of fear and gratitude. The little girl's eyes shone with a quiet resilience, as if she'd finally found a place where she belonged. As they walked back to the house, Kate knew their journey wasn't over. There were still questions, still mysteries to unravel. But for now, Lila was safe, and that was enough. Back inside the house, Kate helped Lila settle onto the couch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. The girl clutched the worn piece of fabric from her old dress, her fingers tracing its edges as if drawing comfort from it. Kate sat beside her, her heart aching to know more, to uncover the truths that still seemed just out of reach. Tom stood nearby, his gaze heavy on the two of them. He had seen strange things in his line of work, but this was different. He knew they couldn't ignore what had just happened. He needed answers as much as Kate did, but he was deeply aware that digging into the unknown sometimes brought dangerous things to the surface. For a while, they sat in silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Finally, Tom broke the stillness. "Kate, I think we need to talk to someone who knows more about this, about Lila and whatever that was." His voice was soft, but his eyes held an intensity that Kate hadn't seen in him before. She nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. The next morning, Tom reached out to an old friend, Sam, who'd retired from the force years ago but had always been a sort of mythological figure in the department. Sam was the kind of man who believed there was more to the world than could be explained, and he had a reputation for helping on cases that others might shy away from. When Tom explained the situation, Sam agreed to meet them. Later that afternoon, Sam arrived at their home, his face a mixture of curiosity and wariness. He was a tall man with silver hair and an air of quiet authority that commanded respect. Kate offered him a seat, and once everyone was settled, Tom recounted everything that had happened. Sam listened in silence, his expression unreadable as he absorbed every word. When Tom finished, Sam leaned back, his gaze settling on Lila. The girl sat close to Kate, her eyes darting between the adults, as if sensing the weight of the conversation. "Sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried, no matter how deep we try to hide it," Sam said quietly, his eyes never leaving Lila. "Spirits, memories, they cling to the ones who remember them, to the people they think can set them free." Kate swallowed hard, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. "So, what does she need from us? Why has she come back now, after all these years?" Sam looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes they come back because they're lost, trying to find their way home. But other times," he paused, his gaze flicking to Tom, "they return because there's something dark tethering them here, something they can't escape on their own." Lila's small hand reached for Kate's, and Kate gave it a gentle squeeze. She could feel the girl's fear and confusion, and a fierce protectiveness welled up within her. "Whatever it is, we'll help her. We won't let anything hurt her again." But as Sam prepared to leave, he pulled Tom aside, his expression grave. "Be careful," he warned. "If there's something dark attached to her, it might not like you interfering. You need to be prepared for things to get complicated." That night, as Kate tucked Lila into bed in their guest room, she felt a sense of peace, as though they were creating a safe haven for the girl. But as she closed the door, a cold draft swept down the hall, prickling the hairs on the back of her neck. She turned, half expecting to see the shadowy figure lurking, but the hallway was empty. Still, the unsettling feeling lingered, reminding her that they weren't alone. In the days that followed, strange occurrences began to escalate around the house. Doors would creak open in the middle of the night, and lights would flicker as if someone else was present, someone unseen. Kate found herself glancing over her shoulder constantly, as if expecting to see the figure lurking just beyond the edge of her vision. One afternoon, while Kate was preparing lunch, she heard Lila talking softly to someone. At first, she thought the girl was playing, but as she listened closer, she realized the tone in Lila's voice was different, serious, almost pleading. Kate approached the door quietly, not wanting to startle her. "Please," Lila whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't want to go back. I'm safe here. They protect me. Kate's heart twisted, and she knocked gently before entering the room. Lila looked up, startled, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. Who are you talking to, sweetie? Kate asked, keeping her voice soft and reassuring. Lila hesitated, glancing toward the corner of the room, where shadows gathered in a way that seemed unnatural. She didn't answer, but Kate could see the tension in her small frame, as if she was holding back words she was too afraid to speak. That night, as Kate lay in bed beside Tom, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. She felt an oppressive weight in the room, an energy that clung to her skin, making it hard to breathe. She reached for Tom's hand, finding comfort in his warmth, but sleep remained elusive. The following morning, Tom received a call from the station. A nearby house, one that had been abandoned for years, had gone up in flames in the middle of the night. No one could explain how it had started, and there were rumors circulating that the place had always been haunted, that strange things happened there that no one could explain. When Tom told Kate about it, she felt a chill run down her spine. The house wasn't far from theirs, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected somehow, that the darkness they were dealing with was more widespread than they had imagined. As the days passed, Kate began to notice changes in Lila. The girl seemed withdrawn, her once bright eyes dull and haunted. She would flinch at shadows and avoid certain parts of the house as if something there frightened her. The sense of unease grew, until it filled every corner of their home, pressing down on them like a suffocating blanket. One night, Kate woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, soft but unmistakable. She sat up, listening intently as the footsteps grew closer, then stopped outside her door. Her heart pounded as she waited, but no one entered. Slowly, she got out of bed and crept to the door, opening it just enough to peer out into the darkness. There, standing in the dim light, was the shadowy figure. His gaze was fixed on Lila's room, his posture tense and menacing. Kate felt a surge of anger and fear, and without thinking, she stepped into the hallway, her voice barely a whisper. "Leave her alone." The figure turned to look at her, and Kate felt a chill wash over her as his eyes met hers. There was a cruelty in his gaze, an unyielding darkness that seemed to reach for her, threatening to pull her under. But she held her ground, refusing to back down. Just as she thought she might be overtaken by the oppressive energy, the figure faded, dissolving into the shadows like smoke. Kate stood there, breathing heavily, her fists clenched as the fear gave way to a fierce determination. She wouldn't let this darkness consume them. She wouldn't let Lila be taken. The next day, she and Tom sat down with Sam again, recounting everything that had happened since his last visit. Sam listened carefully, his expression grave. "It sounds like you're dealing with something that has a strong attachment to Lila," he said slowly. "Sometimes spirits aren't bound by love or kindness. They're bound by fear, anger, or control. And breaking that bond can be dangerous." Kate's mind raced, her determination hardening. "So how do we help her? How do we make it stop?" Sam hesitated, then nodded. "There might be a way. But it won't be easy, and it'll require all of you to be strong. Spirits like this, they feed on fear, on weakness. If you're going to help Lila, you need to be prepared to face whatever darkness this spirit brings with it." As they planned their next steps, Kate felt a sense of purpose strengthening within her. She knew the journey would be fraught with challenges, but she was willing to face anything if it meant freeing Lila from the chains of the past. And as night fell, bringing with it the familiar shadows and whispers, Kate stood ready, knowing that the battle for Lila's freedom had only just begun. The stakes were higher than ever, and the darkness more menacing, but she wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever. That evening, Kate gathered every ounce of courage she had. She spent the day researching old traditions and speaking to Sam about ways they could protect themselves. There was a plan forming, one that would require them to confront the spirit directly, to show it they weren't afraid, that it held no power over them anymore. But knowing what they needed to do didn't make it any easier. Lila, sensing the tension, clung to Kate more closely. The young girl's silence had grown more pronounced over the days, and she was visibly drained, as if the spirit's presence was siphoning away her energy. Tom noticed too, casting worried glances whenever Lila looked away. The night before they were set to confront the spirit, Kate decided to try and get more information from Lila. Sitting down beside her, Kate spoke gently, "Sweetie, I know this is all very scary. But if there's anything at all, you can tell me about why you're here, it might help us." Lila's eyes darted nervously around the room. She seemed to wrestle with an invisible force, torn between what she wanted to say and what she was afraid might happen if she spoke. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't mean to bring him here. I thought I could be safe. But he followed me." Kate felt her heart ache as she reached out to hold Lila's hand. "Who is he, Lila? Is he someone from before?" Lila nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "He's always there. Even when I try to hide, he finds me." Her voice was barely a whisper, and Kate could feel the deep-rooted fear trembling in the child's words. Before Kate could ask more, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. She and Lila jumped, their eyes wide with shock. Tom rushed over, his face tense as he looked down the corridor. Shadows flickered at the edges of the light, curling along the walls like dark fingers stretching toward them. "I think he's here," Tom said, his voice steady but with an edge of urgency. They all felt it, the shift in the air, the cold weight pressing down on them. It was as if the very walls of the house were holding their breath, waiting. Sam had warned them that confronting the spirit would provoke it, that it would test their resolve, and now it seemed the spirit was ready to fight back. Kate, Tom, and Lila gathered in the center of the living room, where they'd set up protection around them with Sam's guidance. Sam had instructed them to stand their ground, to remember that this spirit had no power over them unless they allowed it. But as the lights flickered and the temperature dropped, Kate couldn't help but feel a tremor of doubt creep in. In the silence, a faint voice began to speak, cold and taunting. "You think you can hide from me, little girl? You think they can protect you?" The voice seemed to slither through the room, filling every corner with its dark presence. Kate gripped Lila's hand, pulling her close. "We're not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady even as her heart raced. The shadows seemed to writhe in response, and a figure began to take shape in the doorway. He was tall, his features indistinct but filled with malice, his eyes glinting like coals. "You can't protect her. She belongs to me," he hissed, his gaze fixed on Lila. Tom stepped forward, his face hardening as he faced the spirit. "She doesn't belong to anyone," he said firmly. "You don't control her. She's free." The spirit let out a low, menacing laugh. "You think you can defy me? You're nothing but weak, powerless humans. I've held her before, and I'll take her again." Kate felt her anger flare. She had endured so much to keep Lila safe, and she wasn't about to let this spirit claim her now. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice filled with a fierce determination. "We won't let you hurt her anymore." The spirit seemed to waver, its form flickering as if weakened by their defiance. But it wasn't finished yet. It surged forward, filling the room with a dark, oppressive energy that pressed against them like a weight. Kate and Tom held their ground, refusing to give in. Finally, Lila's voice broke through the darkness, trembling but resolute. "You don't scare me anymore," she said, her small voice growing stronger. "I'm not yours. I'm free, and you can't hurt me anymore." The spirit shrieked, a sound that echoed through the house, shaking the walls. Its form began to dissolve, breaking apart as if shattered by Lila's words. It thrashed, reaching out with one last burst of fury, but as Lila's courage grew, the darkness receded, unable to hold its grip any longer. In a final, agonizing wail, the spirit vanished, leaving the room in silence. Kate, Tom, and Lila stood there, breathing heavily, the weight of what they'd just faced settling over them. They knew that while the spirit was gone, the journey wasn't over. Lila still had a long road ahead to healing, and they were committed to helping her every step of the way. But for now, they'd won a small victory. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, a family bound not by blood, but by the courage to protect one another. And as dawn broke, casting warm light through the windows, they knew that they had finally found a sense of peace together. After that eerie night, the house felt lighter, as if the dark weight that had pressed down on every room had lifted just slightly. Kate, Tom, and Lila went through their days more relaxed, cautiously hopeful that the worst was over. Lila even began to laugh and play a little, a sound so rare that Kate's heart soared every time she heard it. But as the days passed, subtle signs began to creep back in, things so small that at first, Kate brushed them off as paranoia. The occasional cold draft, the strange feeling of being watched when she was alone, the flickering lights. They were fleeting moments, nothing like the heavy, sinister presence they'd felt before, but they were enough to unsettle her. She found herself watching Lila closely, wondering if the girl sensed it too, but Lila continued to seem more at peace than before. One evening, as they were finishing dinner, A loud knock echoed from the front door. Tom went to answer, and a chill ran down Kate's spine as she heard hushed voices at the doorway. She strained to listen, catching fragments, something about unfinished business, and the danger not being over. When Tom returned, his face was tight with worry. "That was Sam," he said, his voice low. "He's been digging deeper into the spirit's origins. There's more to this than we thought." Kate's pulse quickened. "What does that mean?" "It means we might have only driven it back temporarily. Spirits like this, with strong attachments, they don't leave so easily. And sometimes, they come back stronger." Kate felt a surge of fear, but she swallowed it, not wanting to alarm Lila, who was watching them both with wide, questioning eyes. "What do we do?" Sam had left Tom with instructions for a final cleansing ritual, something intense that would require courage and commitment from all of them. They needed to face the spirit one last time, to sever its connection to Lila and make it clear that it wasn't welcome. That night, after putting Lila to bed, Kate and Tom went over Sam's instructions carefully. Each step seemed more daunting than the last, a line-by-line account of what they'd need to confront. The ritual had to be performed at midnight, the hour when the spirit's power would be strongest and also the most vulnerable. As midnight approached, they gathered in the center of the living room, with Lila beside them, sleepy but understanding that this was important. Kate held Lila close, feeling her small heartbeat flutter against her. Tom lit candles around the room, creating a circle of protection as Sam had instructed. They were ready, or at least as ready as they could be. The house was silent, except for the soft crackling of the candles. But as the clock struck 12, the temperature in the room plummeted. A faint whisper echoed through the space, a sound so low and guttural it was impossible to make out the words, but the malice behind it was unmistakable. Lila gripped Kate's hand tighter, her body trembling. Kate whispered words of comfort, but her own heart was racing. She knew they couldn't show fear, that they had to face this darkness with strength, but every instinct screamed for her to run, to take Lila and escape. Isolating her until she had finally found the courage to leave. But in the letter, she mentioned one last plea. "If anything happens to me, please keep Lila safe from him. He will come looking for her. He will find a way." Kate's hands trembled as she read the words. She suddenly understood what the spirit wanted, and the weight of the realization crashed down on her. This spirit wasn't just a lost soul. It was something darker, something that had pursued Lila's mother in life and had now returned for her daughter. Kate felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. She had to protect Lila, to keep this darkness from claiming her. But as she glanced around, she realized that the spirit was already here, watching, waiting. The stakes had never been higher, and she knew that whatever came next, it would test their courage, their strength, and their bond as a family. The spirit was back, and it wasn't going to leave without a fight. In the days that followed, the tension in the house grew thicker, almost suffocating. Kate felt as though every corner held eyes, watching, waiting. Lila grew quieter, retreating into herself, often clutching the doll as though it were some kind of shield. Kate wanted to take it away, to burn it even, but something stopped her each time. A faint, irrational fear that somehow, separating Lila from it might make things worse. Then one night, the doll disappeared. Kate had left it on the living room table, determined to dispose of it in the morning. But as dawn broke, the doll was gone. Kate searched the house frantically, but it was nowhere to be found. And as if the doll's absence had freed something, the eerie occurrences intensified. Lights flickered, casting strange shadows along the walls. Faint whispers drifted through the house, barely audible but unmistakable, like someone murmuring right in her ear. Objects began to move on their own, a picture frame tumbling off the shelf, doors creaking open without a touch. It felt as though the house itself was alive, stirring with a dark, restless energy. Then, late one night, Kate was jolted awake by a loud bang. She bolted out of bed and found Lila standing in the hallway, staring down the dark corridor. Kate called her name softly, but Lila didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on something in the shadows, her face pale. "Lila, sweetheart?" Kate's voice wavered as she approached her daughter, dread prickling along her skin. Slowly, Lila turned to her, her face blank, her eyes almost vacant. "She's here, Mom," she whispered, her voice eerily calm. "She's waiting for me." Before Kate could respond, a shadow moved down the hallway, dark and looming. Kate froze, her heart pounding as she watched the figure slowly approach. But as it moved closer, She saw that it wasn't just a shadow, it was a form, twisted and hollow, like a living darkness, its eyes glowing faintly with a malicious light. Desperate to protect Lila, Kate grabbed her daughter's hand and pulled her into her bedroom, slamming the door behind them. She locked it, leaning against it as her heart raced, the whispers growing louder outside the door. Lila clung to her, trembling, her small hands digging into Kate's arms. "Mom, I'm scared," Lila whispered, her voice shaking. Kate stroked her hair, trying to keep calm for both their sakes. "It's going to be okay, baby. We're going to get through this." But as the whispers intensified, she knew they were running out of time. She needed help. Someone who could understand what they were facing and how to fight it. With a trembling hand, she picked up her phone and dialed Sam's number, praying he would answer. The line rang endlessly before Sam's sleepy voice came through. "Kate, it's late. What's going on?" "Sam, I need you here now. The spirit, it's back, and it's not just a ghost this time. It's something darker. Please, come quick," she whispered, her voice filled with urgency. There was a pause, and she could hear Sam waking up fully, the gravity of her words sinking in. "Stay in the room, keep Lila close. I'll be there as soon as I can." Kate hung up, her grip on the phone tight. She held Lila close, rocking her gently as the minutes ticked by, each one stretching on in the silence, broken only by the faint scratching sounds outside the door. It felt as though the spirit was waiting, biding its time, enjoying the fear it was instilling in them. Finally, she heard a knock at the front door. She opened her bedroom door cautiously and called out, "Sam?" His familiar voice responded, steady and calm. "It's me. Are you okay?" Kate rushed to the door, flinging it open to find Sam standing there, his face serious but determined. He stepped inside, glancing around the house as if sensing the dark presence himself. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice low. Kate described the figure. Kate noticed the change in Lila most of all. The little girl had been through so much, yet now, there was a sparkle in her eyes, a kind of innocence restored. She laughed more, played with the neighborhood kids, and even began to open up about her memories and dreams. For the first time, she seemed like any other child her age, free to be herself without fear or hesitation. One quiet evening, Kate found Lila sitting on the porch, looking up at the stars. She joined her, settling down beside her on the steps. "Do you ever think about her?" Kate asked softly, referring to Lila's mother. Lila nodded, her gaze fixed on the sky. "I think she's watching over us," she said. "Like an angel." She looked at Kate, a soft smile on her face. "Mama would be happy I found you." Kate felt tears prick at her eyes, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. She hugged Lila, holding her close as they both looked up at the sky, comforted by the idea that Lila's mother was out there somewhere, watching over them. In that moment, Kate felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before, a feeling that they were all exactly where they were meant to be. As the days turned into weeks, life took on a new rhythm. Kate, Tom, and Lila became inseparable, bound not only by what they'd gone through but by a deep, genuine love for one another. They shared laughter, quiet moments, and even the occasional fear when memories of that night would resurface. But they knew they had each other, and that was all that mattered. One afternoon, while they were packing up old boxes in the attic, Tom came across an old family album that had belonged to Lila's mother. He handed it to Lila, who opened it slowly, her fingers tracing the faces in the photos. She smiled, seeing pictures of her mother as a young woman, laughing with friends, and later, holding a tiny Lila in her arms. "I didn't know I still had this," Lila said, her voice filled with wonder. "Thank you for helping me find it." Kate and Tom exchanged a glance, sharing a quiet understanding of how far they'd all come. They watched as Lila carefully closed the album, a look of peace on her face. It felt like she had reclaimed a part of her past, something precious she could carry with her into the future. One evening, just as the sun was setting, Sam paid them a visit. He stepped into the house, looking around with a nod of approval. "Feels different in here," he said with a smile. "You all did well." Kate and Tom thanked him, knowing that without Sam's help and guidance, they might never have found the courage to face what they did. Sam gave Lila a warm smile, kneeling down to meet her gaze. "You're a brave one," he told her. "Never forget that." Lila grinned, her face lighting up with pride. She reached out and took Sam's hand, giving it a little squeeze. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. As Sam left, they all stood on the porch, watching the last light of day fade into twilight. They knew that life would have its challenges, that shadows might come and go, but they had learned something powerful, that together, they could face anything. In the months that followed, Kate and Tom formally adopted Lila, making her a permanent part of their family. It was a day filled with joy and laughter, a celebration of the family they had become. Neighbors, friends, and even Sam gathered to congratulate them, filling their home with warmth and happiness. And as they all stood together, posing for photos, Lila looked up at Kate and Tom, her eyes shining with happiness. She had found her place, her people, and she knew that no matter what happened, she would always have them by her side. As the years went by, memories of that dark time faded, replaced by new ones filled with love and laughter. And though they never forgot what they had been through, they knew it had only made them stronger, bringing them closer than ever. Together, they had built a life filled with love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of family. And for Lila, Kate, and Tom, that was more than enough. As the seasons passed, the house settled into an era of peace, and their small family flourished. Lila had grown taller, her once guarded expression now replaced with joy and confidence. Kate and Tom often marveled at how far they'd all come, how the darkness that once haunted them seemed like a distant memory. But one evening, something unusual happened. Lila came downstairs, clutching an old, weathered doll that Kate didn't recognize. The doll was small, with faded fabric and delicate, hand-stitched features. Its dress was frayed, and one of its eyes was missing, giving it a lopsided look that was somehow both endearing and eerie. "Where did you find that, sweetie?" Kate asked, trying to keep her tone light, but a strange chill ran down her spine as she looked at the doll. Lila held the doll tightly, her expression distant. "It was in my closet. I don't remember putting it there," she said, almost in a whisper. Kate frowned. She had gone through Lila's room several times over the past year, cleaning and organizing. She would have remembered a doll like that. Trying to shake off her unease, she smiled and took Lila's hand. "Well, it's cute. It must have been one of your old toys, don't you think?" Lila hesitated, her gaze lingering on the doll. "I think it used to be my mom's. I feel like I remember it from somewhere." Kate's heart sank slightly, but she didn't want to make a big deal of it. She reminded herself that things like this would come up now and then. Memories had a funny way of resurfacing when you least expected them. But as the night wore on, the doll seemed to become more of a presence in the house. By morning, Kate noticed something peculiar. She'd left the doll on Lila's dresser the night before, but now it was sitting on the couch in the living room, facing the front door. Kate chalked it up to Lila playing with it before breakfast, but something about it left her uneasy. She glanced at Lila, who shrugged, just as puzzled. Over the next few days, little things began happening around the house. Lila's toys would be moved, lights would flicker, and faint whispers filled the hallways at night. The sense of dread returned, more potent than before, as if an unseen force had reawakened. Kate's heart raced with a familiar fear, but she tried to stay calm, convincing herself that it was just her imagination. One night, as she was tucking Lila into bed, she noticed the doll again, sitting on the nightstand, its lopsided gaze fixed on the bed. She tried to ignore it, but Lila suddenly clutched her hand. "Mom, I think she's back," Lila whispered, her voice trembling. Kate felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" Lila's eyes filled with tears. "I feel her watching me again, like she did before. Only now, she feels angry." Kate tried to hide her fear, wrapping her arms around Lila protectively. "It's just a doll, sweetheart. Nothing can hurt you. We got rid of everything bad in this house, remember?" But as she looked over Lila's shoulder, she could swear the doll's face had shifted slightly, as if it wore an expression of twisted satisfaction. That night, Kate couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the house making her jump. She finally drifted off, only to be awakened by a faint sound, the sound of a child humming a lullaby, distant and haunting. She sat up, her heart pounding. The sound grew louder, filling the room, but when she got out of bed and checked on Lila, she found her fast asleep. Determined to understand what was happening, Kate called Sam the next morning. She explained everything, from the doll appearing out of nowhere to the eerie incidents that had begun to fill their home once again. Sam listened carefully, his voice grave. "I thought we were done with this," he said, sounding genuinely troubled. "But if the spirit is back, it means there's something unresolved, something it still wants." And the doll may be its way of connecting to Lila. Kate's stomach twisted. What does it want? That's what we need to find out, Sam said. There could be more to Lila's past than we realized, something tied to her mother or something left behind. Spirits don't usually come back unless they have unfinished business. Kate's mind raced. She thought of Lila's mother, the life she'd led before, and wondered if there were secrets buried deeper than they'd ever imagined. With Sam's help, they decided to look into Lila's mother's past, searching for anything that might explain this resurgence. Kate hoped to discover an answer before the spirit could harm them again. Over the next few days, strange happenings continued. The doll would show up in different rooms, and each time Kate found it, she felt a sense of dread, as if the doll were watching her. Shadows moved in the corners of her vision, and the whispers grew louder, almost as if they were trying to form words. Lila became more withdrawn, haunted by a fear she couldn't explain, and Kate's worry deepened. One afternoon, as she was sorting through old paperwork, she came across a letter from Lila's mother, a letter she'd never noticed before. It was written in a shaky hand, as if it had been penned in a moment of desperation. Kate read it, her heart pounding as she absorbed the words. The letter revealed a part of Lila's mother's life that Kate had never known, an abusive relationship with a man who had been possessive and controlling. The man had tried to separate Lila's mother from everyone she cared about, isolating her until she had finally found the courage to leave. But in the letter, she mentioned one last plea. If anything happens to me, please keep Lila safe from him. He will come looking for her. He will find a way. Kate's hands trembled as she read the words. She suddenly understood what the spirit wanted, and the weight of the realization crashed down on her. This spirit wasn't just a lost soul. It was something darker, something that had pursued Lila's mother in life and had now returned for her daughter. Kate felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. She had to protect Lila, to keep this darkness from claiming her. But as she glanced around, she realized that the spirit was already here, watching, waiting. The stakes had never been higher, and she knew that whatever came next, it would test their courage, their strength, and their bond as a family. The spirit was back, and it wasn't going to leave without a fight. In the days that followed, the tension in the house grew thicker, almost suffocating. Kate felt as though every corner held eyes, watching, waiting. Lila grew quieter, retreating into herself, often clutching the doll as though it were some kind of shield. Kate wanted to take it away, to burn it even, but something stopped her each time, a faint, irrational fear that somehow, separating Lila from it might make things worse. Then one night, the doll disappeared. Kate had left it on the living room table, determined to dispose of it in the morning. But as dawn broke, the doll was gone. Kate searched the house frantically, but it was nowhere to be found. And as if the doll's absence had freed something, the eerie occurrences intensified. Lights flickered, casting strange shadows along the walls. Faint whispers drifted through the house, barely audible but unmistakable, like someone murmuring right in her ear. Objects began to move on their own, a picture frame tumbling off the shelf, doors creaking open without a touch. It felt as though the house itself was alive, stirring with a dark, restless energy. Then, late one night, Kate was jolted awake by a loud bang. She bolted out of bed and found Lila standing in the hallway, staring down the dark corridor. Kate called her name softly, but Lila didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on something in the shadows, her face pale. "Lila, sweetheart?" Kate's voice wavered as she approached her daughter, dread prickling along her skin. Slowly, Lila turned to her, her face blank, her eyes almost vacant. "She's here, Mom," she whispered, her voice eerily calm. "She's waiting for me." Before Kate could respond, a shadow moved down the hallway, dark and looming. Kate froze, her heart pounding as she watched the figure slowly approach. But as it moved closer, she saw that it wasn't just a shadow, it was a form, twisted and hollow, like a living darkness, its eyes glowing faintly with a malicious light. Desperate to protect Lila, Kate grabbed her daughter's hand and pulled her into her bedroom, slamming the door behind them. She locked it, leaning against it as her heart raced, the whispers growing louder outside the door. Lila clung to her, trembling, her small hands digging into Kate's arms. "Mom, I'm scared," Lila whispered, her voice shaking. Kate stroked her hair, trying to keep calm for both their sakes. "It's going to be okay, baby. We're going to get through this." But as the whispers intensified, she knew they were running out of time. She needed help, someone who could understand what they were facing and how to fight it. With a trembling hand, she picked up her phone and dialed Sam's number, praying he would answer. The line rang endlessly before Sam's sleepy voice came through. "Kate, it's late. What's going on?" "Sam, I need you here now. The spirit, it's back, and it's not just a ghost this time. It's something darker. Please, come quick," she whispered, her voice filled with urgency. There was a pause, and she could hear Sam waking up fully, the gravity of her words sinking in. "Stay in the room, keep Lila close. I'll be there as soon as I can." Kate hung up, her grip on the phone tight. She held Lila close, rocking her gently as the minutes ticked by, each one stretching on in the silence, broken only by the faint scratching sounds outside the door. It felt as though the spirit was waiting, biding its time, enjoying the fear it was instilling in them. Finally, she heard a knock at the front door. She opened her bedroom door cautiously and called out, "Sam?" His familiar voice responded, steady and calm. "It's me. Are you okay?" Kate rushed to the door, flinging it open to find Sam standing there, his face serious but determined. He stepped inside, glancing around the house as if sensing the dark presence himself. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice low. Kate described the figure. The whispers, the doll that had vanished, and the unsettling sense of being watched. Sam's expression darkened as he listened, his jaw clenching. "I think I know what this is," he finally said, his voice grim. "The spirit attached itself to Lila's family long ago. It was drawn to the pain, the brokenness, and it latched onto her mother. Now that she's gone, it wants Lila. It feeds off of fear and pain, growing stronger as it breaks down its host." Kate's heart sank. "So, it wants to hurt her?" Sam nodded. "It doesn't just want her, it wants her spirit, her life force. It's trying to wear her down, break her will, and eventually, it could try to take her altogether." The words hit Kate like a punch. She wrapped her arms protectively around Lila, who looked up at Sam with wide, frightened eyes. "What can we do to stop it?" Sam took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. "We need to sever its connection. There's a ritual we can try, but it's risky. If it works, it'll banish the spirit from Lila and this house. But if we fail, it could become even more powerful." Kate felt a wave of terror but knew she had no other choice. "What do we need to do?" Sam explained the ritual, outlining the steps in a calm, measured tone, though Kate could sense the tension beneath his words. He retrieved a small pouch from his bag, filled with herbs and candles, along with a vial of holy water. As he prepared, he instructed Kate to sit with Lila in a circle of candles, holding her close. The air grew thick as Sam began the ritual, chanting softly, his voice filling the room. The shadows seemed to swirl, gathering in the corners, as if they were watching, waiting for a chance to strike. Then, a loud crash echoed from the hallway, and the figure appeared, looming at the edge of the candlelight. Its eyes gleamed with rage, its form shifting and twisting as it moved closer, as though it were made of smoke and shadow. "Stay back," Sam commanded, throwing a handful of herbs toward it. The figure hissed, recoiling, but didn't retreat. Kate held Lila tightly, feeling her daughter's heart racing against her own. She whispered reassurances, though her own fear was mounting. The spirit seemed to resist every attempt Sam made to drive it away, its form growing darker and more menacing with each passing moment. As the final moments of the ritual neared, Sam's voice grew louder, more forceful, his chants filling the room. But the spirit lunged, breaking through the circle, its hand outstretched, reaching for Lila. Kate felt a surge of desperation. She stood up, positioning herself between the spirit and her daughter, determined to protect her at any cost. She shouted at it, pouring every ounce of her love and resolve into her words, daring it to come through her. For a brief, terrifying moment, the spirit paused, as if considering her challenge. Then, with a final, deafening shriek, it dissolved into a dark mist, fading into nothingness as Sam completed the ritual. The air was suddenly still, the silence almost surreal. Sam looked around, his face pale but relieved. "I think it's gone." Kate and Lila clung to each other, trembling but safe. The spirit had been banished, its hold broken. Yet as Kate held her daughter, she knew this battle had changed them all forever. Kate sat in silence, holding Lila tightly as the house remained eerily still. The air, once thick with an oppressive weight, now felt unnaturally calm. Sam stood, his expression thoughtful but weary, as if he, too, was uncertain of what to believe. The spirit had vanished, yes, but there was a lingering feeling, a sense that something wasn't quite finished. Lila finally stirred in her arms, her small hands clutching Kate's shirt. Her face was pale, but her eyes, those eyes, seemed distant, clouded with something Kate hadn't seen before. The light in them, that spark of innocence, flickered as if something else was looking out through them. "Lila?" Kate whispered softly, brushing a lock of hair from her daughter's face. "Are you okay?" But Lila didn't respond. Instead, she reached out toward the empty space in the room, her fingers trembling as if she were touching something only she could see. A shiver ran down Kate's spine. Something was wrong. "Lila, baby, talk to me," Kate pressed, her voice shaking with concern. But Lila's gaze never left the same spot in the room. Her lips parted, but the words that came out weren't her own. They were cold, hollow, unfamiliar. "You think I'm gone, don't you? You think you've won?" The voice echoed around the room, low and guttural, like a whisper from the grave. Kate froze, her heart slamming in her chest. It couldn't be. The spirit had been banished, it was supposed to be over. Yet here it was again, clawing its way through her daughter's body, speaking through her, taunting her. Sam's face drained of color as he stepped forward, his eyes wide in disbelief. "It's back," he said quietly, his voice tight with fear. It never left. Kate felt a surge of panic. She shook Lila's shoulders, desperately trying to get her back, but Lila's head fell back, and her body became limp in Kate's arms. For a moment, Kate thought her daughter had fainted, but when she looked into Lila's eyes again, they weren't her daughter's eyes at all. They were cold, black, void of anything human. "Lila!" Kate screamed, shaking her again. But the little girl didn't respond, didn't blink. Instead, the figure in the darkness seemed to grow stronger, more present, as though it were feeding off the confusion and fear that filled the room. The room seemed to shift, and the temperature dropped rapidly. Breathless with the weight of dread, Kate realized something was terribly wrong. The spirit had been driven away, yes, but now it had found another way to enter, another host. Her daughter. "Sam, what do we do?" Kate's voice cracked, her panic rising. Sam's eyes narrowed, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. He was thinking, calculating. It's not the same spirit. It's a part of it. A piece of its essence has stayed behind. When we banished it, it didn't vanish. It transferred into Lila. It's using her as a vessel now. Kate's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, a vessel? How do we stop it?" "The only way to stop it is to sever the connection. We need to remove the dark energy that has latched onto her, before it completely consumes her." Kate's eyes darted to Lila, her daughter's body still motionless, her eyes now wide open and black as coal. "But how? We did everything you told us. The ritual." Sam shook his head. "That wasn't enough. We didn't fully understand what we were up against. This isn't just a vengeful spirit anymore. This is something much older, more powerful. It's not just haunting her, it's trying to claim her." Kate's heart pounded in her chest. "How do we fix it? Please, Sam, I'll do anything." Sam's face was tight with urgency. "We need to perform a stronger ritual. Something deeper, but it will take time, and I'm going to need help. I'll need to contact someone who's dealt with this before. But right now, we need to keep Lila away from whatever it is that's inside her. Keep her calm, don't let her speak, and don't let her wander." Kate nodded, feeling a sense of helplessness creeping over her. Her daughter wasn't her daughter anymore. She was a puppet, controlled by an unseen force. Kate felt the last remnants of her sanity slipping away, each moment dragging her further into despair. Suddenly, Lila's body jerked violently. Her eyes rolled back, and she began to scream. This wasn't the innocent scream of a frightened child, but a bone-chilling sound, filled with unnatural fury. The air vibrated with the intensity of her cries, and for a brief moment, Kate thought the house itself might crumble under the weight of it. "Lila, please, baby, please," Kate cried out, tears streaming down her face as she tried to hold her daughter, but it was as if she were holding onto a stranger, something cold and unrecognizable. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the scream stopped. Lila's body went limp once again. She breathed heavily, as if nothing had happened, her eyes still black and vacant. Kate's mind raced. What was going on? How could her daughter have returned to normal so quickly? But before she could process the change, the room seemed to distort again. The temperature dropped even lower, and a flickering light filled the room, as though it were caught between dimensions. A voice, familiar yet warped, whispered from the shadows. "You thought you could banish me," it hissed, cold and cruel. But now, I'm not alone. Kate's heart sank. This wasn't just one spirit, it was an entire force. And it was growing stronger. The very foundation of their home seemed to tremble as something began to materialize in the darkness, taking form, a figure cloaked in shadow. Sam stepped back, his face pale. This is worse than I thought. Suddenly, the air around them shifted, and Kate realized what was happening. The entity had never left. It had only been waiting for the right moment to strike, to expand, to bring others into the fold. And now, it was no longer just a haunting, it was a full-on invasion. A deep, guttural laugh echoed through the walls, sending a wave of terror crashing over Kate. She could feel the presence of something far older and far more powerful than anything they had ever dealt with. Sam grabbed Kate's arm, pulling her back as the figure began to take form in the center of the room, its shape solidifying into something monstrous. Kate, we need to leave. Now. This isn't something we can fight alone. Kate's breath quickened, but she refused to move. No, I won't leave her. I can't. But as the figure loomed larger, the ground beneath them trembled, and Kate realized with growing horror that they were running out of time. And then, just as the shadow reached for them, everything went dark. The darkness that enveloped the room was suffocating. Kate's heart hammered in her chest as she clutched her daughter to her, eyes wide, desperately trying to make sense of the silence that had suddenly fallen. The shape in the shadows had disappeared, leaving nothing but the oppressive feeling of its presence lingering in the air. Her mind raced. What had just happened? Where had it gone? She blinked, and the world around her began to come back into focus. The faintest glow from the hallway filtered in, illuminating the dimness. She looked at Sam, his face drawn tight with fear, his hand still gripping hers. But the panic that had filled him before had shifted into something else, something more urgent, and Kate followed his gaze. Lila was standing, her little body unnaturally still, her eyes wide open but void of any recognition. The cold, dark presence she had held onto before was gone, but something new had taken its place. She was staring at Kate, her gaze filled with emptiness, and for the first time, Kate saw something almost empty. The house was silent now, and it was as if the world itself was holding its breath. Kate took a step forward, her voice soft but trembling. Lila? The little girl's head tilted ever so slightly, but it wasn't the movement of her daughter. It was controlled, deliberate. And then, in a voice that wasn't her own, Lila spoke, the words haunting, almost mockingly calm. I'm not your daughter anymore. Kate froze, feeling as though the ground beneath her had shifted, a sickening dread washing over her. The voice had changed completely. It was cold, detached, not Lila's innocent tone, but something darker, something unrecognizable. Sam stepped back, his face pale, his voice hoarse. This isn't her. It's the spirit. It never left. Kate's heart twisted in agony. She was losing her daughter, losing everything. No, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. No, this can't be happening. But Lila didn't respond. Instead, her lips curled into a cruel, unsettling smile. The blackness in her eyes shifted, as though something was crawling underneath, pulling at the very fabric of her being. And then, the room began to pulse with energy. Suddenly, Kate understood. The spirit hadn't simply been lingering. It had woven itself into the fabric of Lila's soul, feeding off her innocence, her vulnerability. It wasn't just controlling her, it had made her its home. Lila was no longer just a victim. She was the vessel, the source of this entity's power. With the understanding came a new, terrifying urgency. Kate could feel the weight of the spirit, the darkness, growing stronger with each passing second. It wasn't just a haunting anymore. It was an invasion, a possession. But there was something else, something Kate hadn't seen before. It was a flicker of something familiar in Lila's eyes, a brief moment where the love and warmth she had always known from her daughter shone through. It was fleeting, like a light barely visible in a storm, but Kate clung to it with everything she had left. I won't lose you, Kate whispered, more to herself than to Lila. Not like this. But before she could act, the world seemed to shift again. The air turned cold, and the room trembled once more. Sam stepped forward, his face set with determination. We have to finish this, Kate. We can't keep waiting for a sign. It's now or never. Do you think we can still save her? Kate asked, voice cracking with raw emotion. I don't know, Sam replied, his gaze fixed on Lila. But we have to try. Kate's heart ached as she looked at her daughter, her little girl standing motionless in front of her. The struggle between light and dark, love and fear, was playing out right before her eyes, and she wasn't sure how much longer they could hold on. With trembling hands, Sam reached into his bag and pulled out an ancient, worn book, its pages marked with symbols Kate didn't understand. He began to chant, his voice low, steady, filling the room with words that seemed to vibrate with power. Kate could feel the tension building around them, the oppressive weight of the darkness fighting back, but she refused to let go. Lila's eyes flickered once more, the darkness inside them writhing, resisting. Kate's breath caught as she reached for her daughter, holding her tightly, praying, pleading with everything she had left. "Please, Lila," Kate whispered. "Please come back to me." The chanting grew louder, more urgent, and as Sam's voice echoed through the room, a surge of energy rippled through the air. The walls seemed to shudder, the ground beneath them groaning, and for a brief moment, Kate thought the house might collapse entirely. And then, nothing. The room fell into an eerie silence. The coldness that had gripped them slowly faded, and Kate dared to glance at Lila. Her daughter's eyes were now a soft brown again. The blackness had receded, leaving behind the faintest hint of warmth in her gaze. Kate's heart skipped a beat. It was over. They had done it. The darkness had been driven away. But just as she thought the terror was finally behind them, a chilling laugh echoed from nowhere. "You think you've won?" The voice slithered through the room, cold and mocking. "This is just the beginning. You cannot banish what has been awakened." Kate's blood ran cold. The voice, was it still Lila? Was it the spirit? She didn't know, but one thing was clear. They had only scratched the surface. Before she could react, a shadow rose behind Lila, a dark figure creeping out of the corner of the room. But this time, it wasn't just a shadow. It was a presence, vast and terrible, with eyes that gleamed with malice. The room seemed to close in around her, and as the figure stepped forward, Kate realized with a jolt of terror that this was only the beginning of something far more dangerous than she could have imagined. Lila's hand reached out slowly, her fingers trembling as they brushed against Kate's skin. "I'm still here," Lila whispered, her voice barely a breath. And as Kate looked into her daughter's eyes, she knew. She had no idea what she was up against now. The true battle had just begun. Kate's heart stopped in her chest as she stared at her daughter's hand, the chill of her touch seeping through her skin. Lila's fingers, once warm and full of life, now felt cold, almost foreign. But as Kate looked into her eyes, she saw something else, something shifting beneath the surface. It was almost like Lila was fighting to break through, like she was still trapped in the depths of that dark force trying to claim her. The shadow behind Lila seemed to pulse with power, and the air grew even colder. Kate could feel the presence surrounding them, pressing in, filling every corner of the room with malevolent energy. It was as though the very walls were closing in, the light dimming with every breath she took. You don't understand," the voice whispered again, not coming from Lila's lips but from the dark figure. It moved closer, its form taking shape, towering, skeletal, and haunting, with eyes that gleamed like burning coals. The figure's presence seemed to suffocate the very air, pushing Kate's lungs to their limit. She gripped Lila tighter, shaking her, pleading with her. "Lila, baby, fight it. Please fight it. Don't let it take you." Lila's face contorted with pain, her tiny hands clutching Kate's shirt as if she were trying to hold onto her. For a fleeting second, Kate thought she saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, something warm, something that belonged to her daughter. But then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness that had taken over. The figure, now fully formed, stepped closer, its hands outstretched, as if it was about to claim them both. "It's too late," it hissed, its voice like gravel scraping across the floor. "You cannot defeat what has already been summoned. The ritual has only begun." Kate felt her pulse quicken, panic rising in her chest. She knew they had to act fast, but how? The ritual hadn't worked. It had only delayed the inevitable. And now, the spirit wasn't just a haunting. It was something far worse, something with the power to spread and consume everything in its path. The cold grew unbearable, the darkness pressing in around her. Kate turned to Sam, desperation in her eyes. "Sam, please, what do we do?" He stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the dark figure, as if he were caught in a trance. "There's nothing we can do," he murmured, almost as if resigned to the inevitable. "It's too powerful. We should have stopped it when we had the chance." "No," Kate snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I won't give up. I won't lose her." Sam's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but then something changed. A spark of understanding crossed his face, and he grabbed the book again. "There's one more thing we can try. It's a long shot, but we have to combine the rituals. If we can force the entity to reveal itself, we might be able to sever the connection completely." Kate's mind raced as she watched Sam flip through the pages, his hands shaking. She didn't understand the words, but the urgency in his actions made her believe. The ritual wasn't just about driving the spirit away, it was about confronting it, exposing it for what it truly was, and ripping it out from the depths of her daughter's soul. With a deep breath, Sam began chanting again, louder this time, his voice echoing through the room, growing more intense with each word. The air seemed to vibrate with power, and Kate held her breath, her eyes locked on her daughter. Lila's body jerked violently, her face twisting in agony as the darkness within her struggled to break free. She screamed, but it was a scream unlike any she had made before, raw, inhuman, filled with a primal rage. The figure that loomed behind her shifted, its form distorting with every word Sam spoke, as though it was being torn apart from the inside out. The dark eyes that burned with malice flickered, and for the first time, Kate saw fear in them, a fear of what was coming. But then, just as Kate thought they might have a chance, the room shook violently, throwing them all to the ground. The walls cracked, the windows shattered, and the air itself seemed to explode with an overwhelming force. Kate screamed as she was thrown across the room, her body slamming into the wall with a sickening thud. When she opened her eyes, everything was different. The house had disappeared. The walls, the windows, the room, it was all gone, replaced by an endless void of swirling darkness. It was as if they had been transported to another realm, one where nothing made sense, where the rules of reality no longer applied. Lila was still standing in front of her, but she was different. Her body was surrounded by a glowing, pulsating aura, her eyes now swirling with a mixture of light and darkness. It was as though she was both herself and not herself at the same time. The dark figure hovered beside her, now just a shadow of its former self, no longer the towering, monstrous form but something smaller, weaker. It seemed to be fading, dissolving, its power being drained by the ritual Sam had invoked. "Lila," Kate whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Baby, please come back to me. Don't let it win." But Lila didn't respond. She stood motionless, her gaze focused on the figure now struggling to maintain its form. Then, for a moment, Kate saw something that took her breath away. Lila's mouth moved, barely a whisper, but it was enough to hear the words that came out. "I'm sorry, Mom, I was too scared." The entity let out an enraged hiss, its form flickering as though it was being torn apart by the very essence of Lila's will. "You cannot stop me, I will consume you both." But it was too late. With a final, blinding flash of light, the dark figure exploded into nothingness. The swirling void around them began to collapse, the oppressive darkness lifting like a cloud that had been blown away by a fierce wind. The room reappeared, but it was different. It was quiet, peaceful, the warmth returning to the air. The presence of evil was gone. Kate rushed to her daughter, pulling her into her arms as she collapsed to the ground, exhausted but safe. Lila's body was warm again, her eyes now clear, no longer clouded by darkness. "I love you, Mom," Lila whispered, her voice small but filled with warmth. Kate clutched her tightly, her heart full of relief and gratitude. The nightmare was over, the darkness had been vanquished, and as she held her daughter close, she realized they had won, not just against the spirit, but against the fear, the doubt, and the terror that had haunted them for so long. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Kate allowed herself to believe that they were safe. The battle had been won, but as she looked around, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them from the shadows. A fleeting glance, a whisper in the wind. Was it really over, or had they only just begun? The calm that followed was almost too much for Kate to bear. Her arms, still trembling, cradled her daughter tightly as Lila nestled against her. It was like she was holding onto a miracle. The air was lighter now, the oppressive weight of fear finally lifted from their shoulders. Everything felt still, as though the world had paused for just a moment to give them the peace they'd fought so hard to regain. Kate closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer, thanking whatever force had intervened. Lila's soft breathing was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of normalcy, of life returning. But even as Kate sat there, holding her daughter, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something still lingered, just outside her reach. Lila stirred slightly, lifting her head to look at her mother. Her eyes, still wide with exhaustion but free of the darkness that had clouded them, locked onto Kate's. There was an innocence to them again, but there was something else too, something almost too knowing, too ancient for a child her age. "Mom?" Lila's voice was soft, almost hesitant, as though she were unsure whether she should speak. Kate held her even tighter, feeling a surge of protectiveness. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. You're with me." Lila didn't respond immediately. Instead, she just looked at her mother with a strange, far-off expression. "The thing, it didn't leave, did it?" she asked. Kate's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? It's gone, Lila. It's over. You're free." But Lila shook her head, her face serious now. "I saw it, Mom. When the light was bright and the shadows disappeared, it was still there. Watching, waiting. It's not gone. It's just hiding." Kate felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "What are you talking about?" "I don't know," Lila whispered, her voice trembling. "But it's not finished. It's not done with us." The room seemed to freeze. Kate's hands tightened around Lila, her mind racing. What was Lila saying? The entity. Had they really defeated it? Or was this something worse, something they hadn't fully understood? The horror that had taken over their lives wasn't just gone, was it? It couldn't be. It couldn't be that easy. Suddenly, Sam's voice broke the silence. He had been standing nearby, watching them with a somber expression. His eyes met Kate's, and for a moment, she saw the same unease reflected there. He stepped forward slowly, his voice low. "Lila's right, Kate." Kate's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "The entity might have been expelled from her body," Sam said, his face grim, "but the connection, it's still there. It's deeper than we thought. We didn't just break it. We only weakened it." A cold dread washed over Kate. Her fingers instinctively tightened around Lila, who now looked up at Sam with wide eyes, as if she had heard the same words echoing in her mind. "Then, what do we do? How do we stop it?" Sam shook his head. "I don't know. We've only scratched the surface, Kate. There are things out there, things we don't fully understand. This wasn't just a random haunting. It was a warning." "A warning?" Kate repeated, her voice shaking. "A warning of what?" Sam didn't have an answer. He just stood there, helpless, his face pale. Then, in the stillness of the room, something shifted. The faintest of sounds, a whisper, like a breeze barely touching the ears, drifted through the space. But there was no breeze. No air. The house was perfectly still. The voice wasn't from outside. It wasn't from Lila or Sam. It was something else entirely. Kate's heart pounded in her chest. "Did you hear that?" Sam looked around, his eyes narrowing. "What was that?" "I don't know, but I'm not going crazy," Kate muttered, her pulse racing. Her eyes darted to every corner of the room, her ears straining for any sound. Then it came again, faint but unmistakable. The whisper wasn't in words, but it felt like a message, like a dark force trying to reach them. It seemed to come from the walls, from the floor, from the very foundation of the house. Kate stood up abruptly, her mind spinning. "We have to go," she said, her voice more urgent than ever. Now, she grabbed Lila's hand, pulling her toward the door. But as she stepped forward, the whisper grew louder, and Kate froze. A shadow crossed the floor in front of her, and she looked down, only to see the unmistakable outline of something dark and twisted, coiling beneath the floorboards like a snake. It wasn't just a haunting. It wasn't just a spirit they had been fighting. It was something much older, something that had been waiting, watching, biding its time. The door slammed shut on its own, trapping them inside. The air turned suffocatingly thick, and for a moment, Kate could only hear the sound of her own frantic breathing. "Sam," she shouted, "what the hell is happening?" But before he could respond, the shadows in the room began to move. Slowly, almost deliberately, the darkness crept toward them, curling and writhing as if it were alive. The floor beneath them groaned, as though the house itself was about to collapse. And then, just as Kate was about to make a run for the door, Lila looked up at her with a gaze so cold, so empty, that it stole the breath from her lungs. "Mom," she whispered, her voice hollow. "It's too late. It's already inside." The last thing Kate saw was the flash of red eyes, too bright, too piercing to be real, before everything went black. Kate's world spun into darkness. For a moment, she couldn't tell where the walls ended and where the floor began. Her mind was a haze of fear and confusion as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Lila's voice echoed in her ears, the chilling words lingering like a curse. It's already inside. She felt the weight of her daughter's hand slip from hers. Panic surged through her body, forcing her to her feet, but the room swayed as though it was no longer stable. She reached out, her hands scraping the walls for any sense of direction, any anchor to reality. The shadows in the room continued to move, creeping closer, pulsating with a malevolent energy that made her stomach churn. "Lila," Kate called out, her voice cracking. "Lila, where are you?" There was no response. Silence fell over her like a thick blanket, but it was the kind of silence that filled the room with tension. The kind that made her feel like she was being watched, like the very air around her was alive, breathing, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, there was a sound. A soft shuffle of feet, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. Kate spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. Her eyes searched frantically, desperate for any sign of Lila. Then she saw her. Lila was standing in the center of the room, her eyes glazed over, a distant, hollow look in them. She wasn't the same little girl who had clung to her moments ago. The energy in the room had shifted again, and Lila seemed to be at the center of it, as though she had become a conduit for something far darker than before. "No, no, no," Kate whispered, stumbling toward her daughter. "Lila, baby, what's happening to you?" Lila's head slowly tilted to the side, her gaze never leaving Kate. Her lips parted slightly, and in a voice that was not her own, she spoke. "You can't save me, Mom. I've already been claimed." The words hit Kate like a punch to the stomach. The voice was cold and alien, the tone dripping with something malicious and otherworldly. It wasn't Lila anymore, not truly. It was as if something else had taken over, had woven itself into the very fabric of her daughter's being. "No," Kate cried, her eyes welling with tears. "You're my daughter. I won't let it take you." But Lila, no, the thing inside her, only smiled. It was a twisted, cruel smile, like a mockery of the girl Kate had once known. The room seemed to grow colder, the darkness pressing in around them, choking the light out of the space. Kate's hands shook as she reached out to grab Lila, but her fingers passed through the girl's form as if she were made of smoke. The temperature dropped even further, and Kate's breath formed clouds in the air. It was as if the room had become an entirely different place, a void where time and space no longer made sense. Then she heard a voice, sharp and menacing, coming from the corner of the room. "You're too weak. You think you can save her?" Kate whirled around to find the figure again, looming in the shadows, its shape shifting and morphing as it came closer. It was the same dark entity, the one that had tormented them, but now it was more powerful, more real, as if it had grown stronger with every passing moment. "You never stood a chance," the figure hissed. "She is mine, and you are nothing but a powerless, weak mortal. You cannot fight me." Kate backed away, her mind racing for a solution, for something that could save her daughter from the nightmare that was consuming her. The ritual, had it failed? Had it only pushed the darkness deeper into Lila's soul? "No," she shouted again, her voice trembling but determined. "I won't let you have her. You won't take her." With everything in her, Kate charged toward Lila, her hands outstretched, hoping to break through whatever hold the entity had on her. The darkness swirled, the shadows closing in, but she kept moving forward, refusing to let the fear paralyze her. But as her hands reached for Lila's shoulders, the child's eyes snapped open, glowing with an eerie light that was both familiar and terrifying. And for a brief moment, Kate saw the flicker of recognition. Her daughter was still there, deep inside. It was Lila, and she was trying to fight. "Mom," Lila whispered, her voice breaking through the darkness. I can't stop it. It's too strong." Kate's heart clenched. She could see the battle within her daughter, the fight between the girl she loved and the darkness trying to consume her. And as she stared into Lila's pleading eyes, Kate knew that this wasn't just about defeating a monster, it was about saving her daughter's soul. The entity's voice echoed again, louder this time. "It's too late. She is mine, and you are nothing. You cannot win." But Kate, her hands trembling with desperation, didn't listen. She closed her eyes, pulling every ounce of love and hope she had left into her heart. She focused on Lila, on the memories they shared, their laughter, the way her daughter's hand felt in hers, the quiet moments that proved they were family. She reached out once more, her voice trembling but steady. "I love you, Lila," Kate whispered, the words carrying everything she had to give. "I'll never let you go. Not now, not ever." The moment the words left her lips, something shifted. A crack of light broke through the shadows, splitting the room like a thunderclap. The entity let out a scream, a guttural, inhuman shriek, as if the very force of Kate's love was burning it away. Lila's body trembled violently, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. The darkness seemed to writhe and recoil, unable to withstand the power of Kate's unrelenting love. The shadows around them began to unravel, the room starting to return to normal. The weight in the air lifted and the cold retreated. But just as Kate thought they were free, the figure spoke again, this time its voice more insistent, more urgent. "You think you have won, but you haven't. You cannot escape me. I will find a way back." And as the light grew brighter, Kate saw something she didn't expect. A flicker of shadow in the corner of the room, barely visible but unmistakable. The entity's influence may have been weakened, but it wasn't gone. Kate's heart sank. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. Kate's breath caught in her throat as the final remnants of the darkness seemed to surge forward, gathering like a storm cloud in the corner of the room. It was too close now. The entity's power hadn't been completely erased. It was still there, lingering just beyond their reach, watching, waiting for its chance to strike again. But Kate wasn't going to let that happen. She couldn't, not after everything they'd been through. Her daughter, Lila, was still in there, somewhere. The girl she loved with all her heart, the one who had once smiled so brightly. Kate wasn't about to let the shadows take her away again. "Lila," she shouted, her voice steady with newfound resolve. She reached for her daughter, her hand trembling slightly but filled with determination. "Lila, listen to me. I know you're still in there. I'm here. We can do this together." The flicker in Lila's eyes was all Kate needed to see. It was a flash of recognition, a glimmer of the little girl she knew, struggling to rise above the darkness that had threatened to consume her. Kate's heart broke, but it also swelled with hope. She could feel the power of the love she had for her daughter, raw, untamed, and unbreakable. That was what mattered now. That was the weapon they needed to destroy whatever was left of the entity. The room pulsed with energy as Kate reached out to Lila again, this time touching her daughter's face. Her fingers brushed against Lila's skin, and something strange happened, a ripple in the air, as if the very fabric of the world was shifting around them. For a brief moment, the entity howled in fury, its dark shape growing larger and more menacing. It seemed like it was trying to fight back, to regain control, but Kate didn't waver. She could feel Lila's presence, her soul, fighting to break free. And Kate, with everything she had left, poured all her love into her daughter's mind, her heart, her spirit. "I'm here. I'm never leaving you. You're not alone," Kate whispered through gritted teeth. The shadows shrieked and writhed as though they were being torn apart. But even as it struggled, the dark presence began to wane, flickering and unraveling like a broken thread. Lila's eyes locked onto Kate's, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they were filled with warmth, love, and clarity. Lila's hand reached up, weak but determined, and clasped Kate's tightly. It was like a lifeline, a connection that tied them both to each other and to the world beyond the entity's grip. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the darkness vanished. The room became still, the air lightened, the weight in Kate's chest lifted, and the chill that had filled the space began to recede. Kate blinked in disbelief. The shadows were gone. The oppressive sense of fear had lifted, and the world around them seemed to settle back into place. For the first time in what felt like forever, Kate felt a sense of peace. Her daughter, Lila, was free. Lila leaned against her mother, exhausted but safe. "We did it, Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kate smiled through her tears, brushing a lock of hair from Lila's forehead. "We did it together." Sam appeared in the doorway, his face weary but relieved. He had been watching from the other side of the room, waiting for the moment when Kate's love would break through. "You're both okay?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with concern. Kate nodded, her heart still racing. "We're okay. She's okay." As Sam stepped into the room, his gaze shifted to Lila, who was now curled up in her mother's arms. "That was incredible, Kate. I don't know how you did it, but you saved her." Kate shook her head, her smile soft. "It wasn't just me. It was us, all of us." The weight of the moment hung in the air for a few moments longer. The battle had been long and grueling, but it was over now. The entity had been defeated, and Lila had been saved. But Kate knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end of their journey. There would always be darkness out there, lurking in the shadows. But now, she had something stronger, a bond with her daughter that no force, no matter how powerful, could break. Together, They had faced the unimaginable and come out the other side, stronger and more resilient than ever before. Sam, sensing the need for quiet, gave them both a gentle nod before turning to leave. "I'll check the perimeter one more time," he said, "but you two take it easy. It's over." Kate didn't speak right away. Instead, she held Lila a little closer, feeling the warmth of her daughter's body against her own. They were safe. They were free. As the moments passed, the house, once heavy with the weight of fear, seemed to breathe again. The walls that had once felt like they were closing in on them now seemed to embrace them with a sense of calm and relief. Lila stirred in Kate's arms, her voice soft. "Do you think it's really over, Mom? The thing, is it gone for good?" Kate hesitated for a moment. There was a flicker of doubt in her heart, but she pushed it aside, replacing it with the certainty that had carried her through every difficult moment. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said softly, "but whatever happens, we'll face it together. Always." And for the first time in a long time, Kate allowed herself to believe that they had truly won. No darkness could ever take that away. No matter what came next, they would fight for each other, and they would never let go. As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, the world outside seemed to open up with new possibilities. The night was still and quiet, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Kate felt hope rising in her heart. They had faced the unthinkable, and they had survived. And now, they were ready for whatever came next, knowing that together, they could conquer anything. As the silence settled over the house, the weight of the past few hours began to lift. It was a kind of peace that felt earned, hard-won, yet fragile in its newness. Kate gently rocked Lila in her arms, as if to reassure herself that everything was real, that they were finally free. Lila looked up at her mother with wide, tired eyes, the ghost of a smile crossing her lips. "Do you think things can go back to normal, Mom?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Kate considered the question carefully. For so long, normal had felt like a distant dream, a world she had almost forgotten. But now, as she gazed at Lila, she realized that maybe, just maybe, the definition of normal had changed. It no longer meant the absence of darkness, but rather, the strength to face it together. "We'll find our new normal," Kate answered softly, brushing a tear from her own cheek. "It might take time, but we'll get there. One step at a time." Sam re-entered the room, his presence steady, his expression calm but still carrying the weight of the situation. He looked at Kate and Lila, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Everything's secure. The darkness is gone, for now, anyway. You two should get some rest." Kate nodded, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. She hadn't realized just how much energy she had been holding onto, how tightly she'd been gripping her fears. Now, with everything coming to a close, she felt herself unraveling in the best way possible. She could finally breathe. Lila yawned, her head resting comfortably against her mother's chest. "I'm so tired, Mom. Can we just sleep for a little while?" Kate kissed her forehead, her heart swelling with love. "Of course, sweetheart. We're safe now." Sam stepped back, giving them space. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." The door clicked softly as he left, leaving Kate and Lila alone in the quiet of the room. Kate gently laid Lila down on the couch, pulling a blanket over her daughter's small frame. Lila's eyelids fluttered, the exhaustion finally overcoming her. Kate sat beside her, her heart still racing, but for the first time in what felt like forever, it was a peaceful kind of racing. She allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The world outside was still and calm now, but she knew it would take time for everything to settle within her. The entity, the darkness that had once seemed so overwhelming, was gone. But Kate knew there would always be challenges ahead. Life had a way of throwing the unexpected at you, and nothing could erase the scars they'd all endured. But they had faced it together. That was something the darkness could never take away. Kate reached over, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Lila's ear, her heart full of gratitude and love. She watched as her daughter's breathing evened out, her face relaxing into the peaceful expression of a child who had, at last, found refuge. Outside the window, the night sky stretched endlessly, serene and untroubled. Kate took a deep breath, feeling a quiet strength rising within her. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. They were no longer defined by fear, by the entity that had tried to tear them apart. They were stronger, bound by love and resilience. And with that final thought, she let her own eyes flutter closed, allowing herself a brief but much-needed rest, knowing that no matter what came next, they would be ready for it. As the house fell into a deep, restful silence, the darkness had been defeated. And for the first time in a long time, Kate and Lila could finally let go of the past, embrace the future, and walk forward together, unbroken.